Hey everybody, welcome back to Guys Night Lab. I'm Jesus Velasquez.
And I'm Jordan Zacharias.
And welcome to another episode of Flick or Treat. And in today's episode, we're going to be focusing on some Halloween stuff that's really fun, and it's our video game life. The arcade life that we have, the NES life that we grew up with, or even the games that we play nowadays. But what we're doing is we're focusing on games that not necessarily are Halloween themed, but are like scary games or scary themed.
Yeah, any video games that put you in the Halloween mood or kind of make you think of horror movies or whatever. So they don't have to be related to horror characters, but just any kind of horror game. That's a good one to play around the Halloween time.
Absolutely. And scary games have like really blown up and since like the 2000s and 2010s and presently. So it's not like games that you only get to play like at Halloween time or anything like that.
Right.
These are games that are just universal and you can play anytime. But yeah, we're gonna start. What are the games that you guys or that you like?
Well, so I go back to the ones I grew up on. I mostly grew up on the NES, so obviously I think of ones like Castlevania. You know, that's a staple I go back to earliest like horror, video game memories. So I think of that one. I think of a bunch of NES games, ones that I rented or played. Once in a while, like Friday the 13th. There's the Nightmare on Elm Street NES game. You think of ones like one you like a lot. I know is Gremlins 2.
Gremlins 2 is really fun.
Game,
yeah,
so
it's teetering on that like kind of scary because Gremlins is kind of like, well, is it a Christmas movie or is it Halloween?
Right.
But yeah, no, but Gremlins 2 is a great game. The NES. If you haven't played it, that's a fun one. Any NES 8-bit game. It's more family friendly, than the newer games. So Gremlins 2 is definitely a fun game that your kids can play and you can even play. And
there's no like Mortal Kombat 10 fatalities or anything.
So but the NES games were like the games that they were fun. Like I said, they weren't specifically like family friendly games, but they're just a little more.
But stuff like Fester's Quest, like Sunsoft games like that. You have. Even more alien type games, like even a Contra technically is like an action aliens style game, stuff like that.
Now you're going
Not really
through a
horror
stretch.
game,
I wouldn't go with
But
Contra.
then you have all the ones that AVGN covered, of course. You have Friday the 13th, you have Nightmare on Elm Street, you have I own Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Jekyll. Yeah, that's a classic one.
There's so many good ones, but there's a whole bunch of there's a weird Frankenstein the Monster Returns NES game that's not that great, but it's kind of cool. There's Monsters in My Pocket, a cool 2-player one I showed you.
That was
a great
really
NES game. That's worth checking out.
Beetlejuice,
which
has the best like theme song in the video. Not like the Beetlejuice theme song.
It's an LJN game. That's all you need to know. So it's not the highest quality,
but it has a great, a great theme song. So then, as we progressed in the '90s, Doom came out for computer, and that
Doom was a huge impact on me.
It was crazy because it was kind of controversial because it's really graphic and violent, and it's pretty much like a guy escaping hell, right? He's trying to escape hell or send hell back to.
So you're a colonial marine or a space marine who has to fight hordes of demons and try to make it out of this base. These where you're traveling around and going from hell to the moon base and all this other weird stuff. But anyway. That was a huge one because that came out probably around, that was ID Software. That was probably 1990.
Yeah.
And that was a big one because it wasn't just that it was a horror-themed game or something really brutal and violent, but it was the idea that it was a horror game, too.
Yeah.
So it was a horror game, but it was also that first-person shooter. Mm-hmm. And we hadn't had a lot of really huge first-person shooter games like that one. With huge maps and big, demons to shoot and everything. So really... You think about games like even Gears of War, a bunch of modern games, like a lot of those are spawned right from Doom. A lot of design and stuff for sure.
One of the games that I really loved to play, it was weird. I didn't love it. It was like a love-hate relationship. Going back to NES was Ghostbusters.
Yeah, and, Ghostbusters.
It was really fun because but I was like, I don't understand to play this game because it's got like a map and then you're like following the ghosts and then I'm like, what do I do? And and then you're like going up the stairs for 30 minutes and you're like, is this game is it glitching out? Like, is it broken? But no, it was just
It's almost as bad as Ghoul School. I showed you Ghoul School. That's another NES rare gem. Actually, an expensive game and not worth a penny. Not worth a penny of it.
That's right. It's a collector's edition of 10 cents.
yeah.
So, but as like you said, we got Doom, and then as times and production value and consoles get more
let me guess, are we going towards PlayStation era maybe?
I am, yes. As they get updated, you get better graphics, better storylines, more money, we go to the creme de la
We're talking a little Mila Jovovich here.
Yes, exactly. Resident Evil.
Resident Evil.
When that
Good
came out, I
call.
think it came out in like 95 or something, 94,
I don't
95.
remember.
Um, but that game was universal because
Massive. Massive.
it was a first person, or no, sorry, not first person. It was a third person, like RPG kind of.
Third person, weird, awkward tank controls and everything.
Yeah.
Very awkward controls, but
But it was so eerie because
was a horror game.
the game was so quiet. It was so there was a lot of puzzles you had to figure out. There's a lot of jump scares, and it was the first time that a game actually had a storyline. So
well,
like
that, and I think it's credited as being one of the very, very first survival horror games, as that became a whole genre in and of itself. Is survival horror. I think that's one of the first ones.
okay, so yeah, so when Resident Evil and the thing, we had Doom, and then we had other stuff. Like it was the first time we didn't have unlimited supplies of ammo where we could just shoot like zombies.
Right? You actually
like,
had to, be careful with your ammo, be
Yeah.
careful with your supplies.
exactly
Your
you had
health,
your
you could die
health.
really easily.
There's like giant spiders.
And if you didn't get to a save point, one of those boxes or whatever the typewriter.
Oh, that's
or
the
whatever it was,
typewriter. Yeah.
If you couldn't get the typewriter in time and you died like feet away from a
Yeah.
room where there's a typewriter, you couldn't save your game. It was really frustrating.
I remember that you had to buy the memory cards
Yeah,
to
yeah,
save your
yeah,
game.
yeah.
So they got you, man. But it was like it was one of those games because it had such a eerie atmosphere. The music was really creepy.
Or lack thereof at times too.
Oh
where
yeah,
there'd be
exactly.
No music.
Oh, you're
yeah.
right. It was like no music. You're like, where'd the music go and everything. So then, and it wasn't just like monster after monster. It was just like it was just a lot of setup. It was like okay, and then there was a jump scare. So Resident Evil for me was like one of the games that totally turned a page on how video games and scary video games were being introduced and brought up, which,
Yeah.
which brings a lot more. So there was Resident Evil, and then like some of the newer games that kind of follow that is like the Evil Within, the Silent Hill games.
Oh yeah, Silent Hill ones are creepy.
Alan Wake. There's a lot of games that copy the Resident Evil platform and blueprint.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I was gonna say one I just remembered that popped into my head was for the original Xbox, and it was called The Suffering. Do you remember that one?
Okay, so I remember like the name. Was that the guy that was in prison or something?
Yeah, he's
okay.
in a prison, and you hear that he either like. At first, you're walking through. There's a cool cutscenes. The inmates are talking about him and saying like, "I already killed his whole family" or whatever. But you're kind of getting this weird backstory, and then all of a sudden, all the lights go on the prison, and something goes down, and there's screaming and blood, and like it was a legit terrifying game at the time. I think it had a sequel. I don't think it sold that well after that. I think people kind of lost interest. I don't think
Yeah.
they ever updated it for the new platforms. But if you ever get a chance, or if you own an original Xbox, go back and look up The Suffering. You can probably find it on eBay for $4 or something. But it's really worth the play though for a creepy game. It does have language. It does have a lot of gore and stuff like that. Just be aware.
Okay.
But but it's a fun one.
So one game that I need to talk about, arcade. Now going to arcade classics of like the 90s. We can't not talk about this game if we're talking about scary Halloween horror
Going
games.
arcades? Okay, what?
So a game that is probably one of the scariest games, not for the game itself, because it is probably, out of all the games we've talked about, the most unbeatable game ever. Do you know what game I'm talking about?
A little game called Ghosts and Goblins.
Yep. That is probably one of the hardest games. I remember
Easily, agreed.
there was a 7-Eleven down the street from, not from our house, but like in the city we lived. And my mom would take me there and I'd play. They had Ghosts and Goblins. I'll never forget it. I'll always associate Ghosts and Goblins with 7-Eleven.
Music is so great.
And I just remember I throw my quarters in there. I'm like, that's it? I was like, I think I went up to
Our
the
kids
clerk.
will never understand that frustration either.
The frustration. I think I went to the clerk. I'm like, hey, your game's broken. It took my quarter. I only had 2 lives.
Yeah.
He's like, okay, dumb kid. Like,
Game is broken.
but yeah, so the Ghosts and Goblins, Ghouls and Goblins, whatever.
Yeah.
That was one of the games that just
Oh yeah, Ghouls and Ghosts and Goblins, whatever it started out as.
yeah, but there was a lot of games for
How
like
cruel that it makes you play through the game twice, by the way. You
Oh.
get to the end, it's a false ending, then you have to go back to the beginning, not different levels, all the same levels, and rebeat it to beat it.
still with
Cruel.
no continues.
No continue.
Yeah. So there was a lot of great games that were arcade games, like which one was it? Night Slashers. It was like a Final Fight type.
There was a
horror
weird
movie.
one. There was a weird one in the arcade called Chiller, where it was a gun game, and they ported it to the NES, and it's brutal because there's like people tied up in torture chambers, and you like shoot their clothes off in the arcade one and stuff.
What? I don't
and then
remember
you, like, blast
that.
their skeletons apart. It's brutal.
Oh, there it is. Is that it?
Yeah, that's it right there. Chiller.
I've never played that game.
Yeah.
I was a good Christian boy.
I've never played it either. I just read about it.
But yeah, Haunted Castle, which is that was the arcade version of Castlevania.
Oh gosh. Okay. That and yeah. And you know what, dude? It reminded me too. AVGN had an episode of a game I played as a kid was Dark Castle.
Okay, what was Dark Castle?
Like think the
oh yeah.
with no music, or it's just that like if you pause it goes
yeah, that one was really
it's for the
weird.
Genesis. That one's hilarious. You should pick that one for Halloween.
So if anyone out there knows this, I remember for our older audience, but if you're younger too, I just don't think you'll figure it out. But I remember like back in the early 90s, I was a kid and at the Family Fun Center or Boomers or whatever you're calling, there was this game, and it was 3-person, like an arcade shooter or whatever.
Okay.
And so picture like the game right now where it's like Star Wars or whatever, and you're holding that little thing and you're like shooting lasers or whatever.
Right.
So it was like that, but it was
with you.
you put your like if it had a big screen, and if you like it was 3 players. And you guys were going around this like haunted house or whatever. But if you were just looking at the screen, you would see. It was
it like House of the Dead, but it wasn't House of the Dead.
It was a lot more.
Like that?
It was a lot more, not as crazy or gory.
Okay.
But it was still kind of like you'd fight like ghosts, and it was a haunted house or something. But the crazy thing was,
familiar.
You would shoot right here, and you would see the screen. But then they had another screen on the gun like this. So if you went like this into the screen, you would see like other ghosts, and it was like
really.
Till this day. It's been like
you can't remember the name.
I can't remember the name. I can't find it on the internet. I know I did not make up that game. Like I remember playing it with people at.
It sounds familiar though.
But it was like it's an older game. Like I said, it's from the early '90s, mid '90s. But it was like so much fun. I remember playing it like on Friday nights when we go to Family Fun Center.
Dude, one like that was for me was Aliens. Did you ever play the original Aliens arcade game
with like Ripley and she's holding like
the
side scroller? Yeah.
Oh man, that one's so good. I love that one.
So. That one, yeah. So those games, like they had a lot of fun, like horror, Halloween, scary games at the arcade.
Alien versus Predator, you know, stuff like that.
So it didn't really find its culture and its niche until like consoles in the late '90s, and early 2000s. So
that you first started to get some true horror games.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean the games now, like they're just pretty much like cinematic movies, and they're crazy, and they're like,
oh yeah, look at the remake of Resident Evil 2 on the Xbox One. Look at that.
Well, I mean, even now there's and I think it's just like I'm older than my father. There's games I'm just like, man, this is a little intense. Like,
a little brutal.
I don't think I should be playing this. So the only game that I remember, that I never, but I just creeped me out the most out of all the games I've ever played. Silent Hill. That was the one game that creeped me out.
Yeah, we already mentioned
the
that
most.
That one's great.
And so, video games have come a long way, especially for horror fans, Halloween fans, or whatever. I mean, like I said, we probably don't even have to make a list. There's people.
Well, there's somebody mentioned like Splatterhouse, you know, like what's his name,
TurboGrafx,
Horror Rick, or whatever his name is. I forget his name, the character in the game. But yeah, you got Splatterhouse. You got a bunch of them that we probably didn't even mention, but there's so many classics. There's so many good series. It's good to look backwards on PC games, old console games. It's fun to look up a lot of good ones this Halloween and check out some fun ones.
Absolutely. And like even like right now, one of the big games we're playing like right now presently is Friday the 13th on Xbox. It's a great game. I'm sure it'll go on sale for Halloween. It's a fun game. It's a little grotesque at times, but for the most part, it's fun. Dead by Daylight, that's another great game.
Yep.
So yeah, they're 4 player. I think it's 4 players or more. There's more. But yeah, just get some friends and have a good time if you like scary movie games or whatever. But yeah, so this is our flicks or treats for Halloween games. Leave a comment on what games you guys like and what games you guys would like to see in the future for us to talk about. All right, take care.
Later.